Is Nefer a free-to-play friendly unit? Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, a new unit's coming up, and I'd like to discuss their free-to-play friendliness potential. Okay, but it's Nefer, so I feel like the answer to that question is extremely obvious. I'll just save you the time. If you want the short answer, and that's all you're interested in, no, she's not. Now, if you want the long answer, well then come along for the ride. Okay, so, I feel like with most units, you can at least somewhat argue their free-to-play friendliness. You can at least find a little bit, like even the tiniest bit of copium that you can latch onto and say, yeah, see, this character has some free-to-play friendliness to them. Maybe they're not the most free-to-play friendly character in the world, but they've got something there. Yeah, I just don't think it's worth coping with Nefer. I really just don't think it's worth coping with Nefer, like, at all. Sure, we can cope and pretend like she has some free-to-play friendly aspects to her, but she really doesn't. Which I actually find quite ironic, considering that Dendro back in the old days was the most free-to-play friendly thing around. And to be fair, low-investment Dendro is still very free-to-play friendly, but it's definitely nowhere near as good as it used to be. However, Nefer, she is indeed a very strong DPS whenever you have all of her premium gear. Whenever you don't have her premium gear, good luck making her work, like, even a little bit. She's not good at all if you don't have Lauma, who is a never-limited 5-star character. And you could argue that on the whole, characters have just been getting more expensive, and I would have to agree with that, because while Flynn's can work without a Nefer, that C1 of his sure does help out with that, and while he's still definitely fine at C0 and is still quite a good unit, it's still definitely a sore thing that, yes, getting one of those things would be a big increase, but in Nefer's case, it's like, yeah, okay, just don't bother. I have already talked at length about how Nefer as a unit basically just does not exist if you didn't pull for the Deer Lady. Like, she is basically a necessity for this character, in the same vein of Skirk really needing a Scoffier. It is basically the same thing. I don't want to say it is literally the same thing, but it is basically the same thing. And at this point, I don't think that it is worth investing into a new DPS if you just don't have whoever the premium support is going forward, because personally, this is just my prediction, but I think that Hoyo is just going to continue this going forward. They are probably just going to continue making supports that are really good for a specific character, and a specific character just tends to not really perform at their best if you don't have said support. Now, the good news is that I wouldn't say it's as bad as Star Rail, because I play quite a few gacha games, and at least in Star Rail's case, generally speaking, whenever a character gets a support, they work like for that one character. Not always, but that's usually the case. And I wouldn't say that it's that bad in Genshin, because Escoffier is amazing for every cryo. Lauma is good for Bloom in general, and generally revives it on the whole. Inefa is just a strong electrocharge unit in general, so it's not like these supports are low value on their own. Not at all, you very much can pull for these supports and find value in them independently of their best installed teams. However, the same cannot be said for the main DPSs themselves. They really want their best support, otherwise they're just not gonna cook. And in Nefer's case, she suffers from this the most. Okay, great. You understand that without Lauma, this is just not a character. As in, if you pull for this character without Lauma, what are you doing? Like, I just gotta hope you're simping, because otherwise I don't know what you're doing. And I know that some of you are not gonna care about meta, and that's great. However, some people do. And for those that do, what are you doing? If you didn't invest into Lauma, then why? But okay, is there literally anything about this character that's free-to-play friendly? Yeah, there is one thing. Her weapon. You can get by just fine on stat sticks or her craftable, so her weapon options are pretty flexible. Great, that is actually something to be fair. That is an aspect of her that you can call free-to-play friendly. However, literally everything else is not. If we set Lauma aside, let's take a look at her other teammates. Nahida, that's a 5-star from Sumeru, and I'm gonna be real, not everybody nowadays is gonna want to pull for Nahida. That is a more niche 5-star these days. Yes, there was a time where she was an amazing must-pull for most accounts, even then I wouldn't really say a must-pull because I didn't get her back then and my account was just fine. She was a must-pull if you were a Dendro player, otherwise you very much could skip her. And that only adds to the fact that if you're not really a Dendro player in general, there is a very high chance that you don't have Nahida, and yet you're gonna have to invest into her in 2025. That aside, there's also C6 Aino. C6 4-star, do I need to add anything else? And eventually we're going to get Columbina. Now she is going to be a really good pull for basically every not cry DPS, I assume. I would be surprised if she wasn't some broken support for basically everybody that has released before her, because that is generally how it has been with the Archons for like the past couple of regions. We know how this goes, we have played these games before. So I do think that Columbina's gonna be great. However, that is still a full team of 5 stars, and there is still basically no team flexibility there. There is just no room for, like, anything. It is an expensive team that asks you to have really niche and specific gear. Basically, the only teammate there that I can see somebody getting for the rest of their account would be Columbina down the line, and even then, Columbina is only going to be good. Well, presumably, we literally don't know what she does yet, but she is probably only going to be good if you've invested into Not Cry. Now, there is a chance that she's going to be good even if you didn't invest into Not Cry. Farina ended up being very universal after all, but I believe that Holyverse believes themselves to have made a big mistake with our dearest Hydro Archon, because they realized how flexible she is, they realized how hard she is to kill in the meta, hence why they are doing literally everything in their power to try and diminish her value, and they are kind of failing, which is hilarious, but once Columbina comes out, they're at least going to have their answer to Not Cry teams. So, there is that, but on the whole, she just doesn't end up being free-to-play friendly in basically any aspect, aside from her weapons. Yes, she has good constellations. Yes, her high investment is really good, and that's pretty impressive for a Dendro character. Like I should say, if you're someone that does have Lauma, maybe you even have Lauma C1, which makes her into a good healer for the team, or just generally you're willing to invest more into this because she's your favorite character, she is really strong. I am not calling Nefer a weak unit whatsoever, don't get it twisted. Whenever you have her best premium gear, this character is amazing. She is so good at single target Dendro. She is pretty damn acceptable in AoE Dendro too, which is quite impressive considering that she's mostly been designed for single target in particular. And all around, she ends up being a very impressive, powerful unit. She is very good. However, she is very good assuming you have best in slot, and it is basically not worth touching her if you're not able to get that best in slot. Now, if you love her, get her, but I am warning you that she is not free-to-play friendly, and I don't think she is worth getting for free-to-plays. It's not just Lauma, it's everything surrounding this character. For example, if you're playing her premium best in slot team, if you don't have C1 Lauma, your sustain is Prototype Amber Nahida. Yeah! That's your sustain, so ideally you would want C1 Lauma for that, and that is such a niche investment. Who would have gotten that aside from the biggest Lauma fans back when her banner was still up? Like, it's a good C1, but you see what I mean. These are such niche investments to the point where I just could not recommend her to your free-to-play. Now, if you're a low spender, I think it's a little bit more justifiable. However, this is because low spenders, at least in my experience, if you're very active and you play every day, you generally can get about a 5-star per patch. Maybe more than that if you're lucky, but generally you can get like a 5-star per patch. So, if you chose Lauma in 6.0 and you won your 50-50, then it's likely that you're going to be able to get Nefer in 6.1, in which case, yeah, she's gonna be good for you. But that's the thing, I actually think that Nefer's just not worth getting unless you're a low spender, because then you definitely can afford her investment. You can afford to save a couple of patches and you're gonna be able to invest big on Columbina, and you're gonna be able to save up for characters like Nahida and make those pulls that aren't really the most optimal. But if you're a free-to-play and your resources are far more limited, I just don't really think you have the resources to spare, and I will say, at least in my experience, there is a big difference between being a free-to-play and a low spender. I do genuinely think that makes quite a big deal. So, looking at it from a strictly free-to-play perspective, like you are not going to spend a dime on this game, I don't think Nefer is worth it. She is very expensive teams-wise, she is not that friendly investment-wise, she is quite a niche DPS, and most of her good investments are quite niche, and all of her investments, they don't really benefit your entire account. They benefit her specifically, which is why I say that unless you're like the biggest Nefer simp and you love this character, I wouldn't even recommend investing into her in general. Like I said, if you're a low spender, then yeah, absolutely, I think you can justify it, especially if you already have Lauma, and if you're a free-to-play that already has Lauma. In your case, if you did manage, then yeah, she's gonna be a good pickup for you, and she's going to be strong. I would get her then. But if you don't bother. So, is she a free-to-play friendly unit? Let's just not cope. I'm not gonna pretend like she's free-to-play. I'm not gonna pretend like she has some value for free-to-plays or that she's gonna be a really good pull. There are far better pulls that you could be making as a free-to-play, to be honest. And I will say that yes, teams have been getting more restrictive on the whole, and you could make the argument that basically every team is this restrictive. But if you take a look at somebody like Moika, for example, yes, Sitlali is a pretty niche character, but she's going to be good for every pyro carry on your account. That's pretty good. Whereas in Nefer's teams, those are just basically only going to be good for Bloom specifically, which in my opinion is a whole lot more niche than something like Pyro carries, especially whenever you consider that we constantly get those, which, to be honest, Hoyoverse, I'm kind of hoping we get a break from Pyro carries, but you get the idea. Even in the more niche teams that require specific investments, at least the supports involved can still be used elsewhere and can still provide general account value. I just don't really think that's going to be the case with Nefer teams. Like, okay, Nahida does have some use cases outside of her main cores and Dendro teams, but Dendro teams just aren't really that good anymore for starters, and her more niche use cases, well, like I said, they're more niche use cases. This is probably the most relevant use case she's gotten in a long time. Then with Ino, well, she's obviously going to be replaced with Columbina, and whether she's worth it or not is just going to depend on whether you're invested into Nordcry or not. And then Lauma, she's a great character, but only if you actually care about Bloom. So, honestly, I'm just going to be very blunt, and I know this is going to upset some people, but no, she is not free-to-play friendly, and I'm not going to pretend like she is. Get her if you love her, but otherwise, not free-to-play friendly. Strong, but requires very high investment in order to be good. Hopefully this video was able to tell you whether Nefer is a free-to-play friendly unit or not. This has been Juice, signing out, and it only makes sense, since the services of the Curatorium are probably quite expensive.